The toxic cocktail of poverty, of illiteracy, of continued racial disparities, of violence, of massive incarceration that is sentencing millions of our children to dead-end lives and to social and economic death.
Some of the schools don't have any desks and paper and stuff like that.
When I walk around my school, I don't see a lot of, teachers trying to help kids. And it's a certain way you're going to try to learn. If you ain't trying to learn and you're thinking about what's going on inside your house, it's going to get you unfocused.
Violence a big deal?
Yes.
We was on news.
Fights every day.
On news. Folks fights every day?
Every day.
It's a small town, but a small town holds a lot of violence in it. Like shootouts and stuff we have, drive-by shooting. I really don't want to live in that type of life anymore. I'm 14 years old and I feel like I'm 25.
A black child born today has less of a chance of being raised by both parents than a black child born during slavery. This is due in large part to the mass incarceration of black men.
If I live to see it, I want to have a big company and do something good with my life.
Edelman, president of the Children's Defense Fund and a co-convener with the Harlem Children's Zone. Geoff happens also to be the chair of the Children's Defense Fund board, and with Policy Link, and Angela Blackwell, the Black Community Crusade for Children. The Children's Defense Fund is committed to leaving no child behind, and we try to be a voice for all of the children of America, but we pay particular attention to children who are especially vulnerable, who are poor, who are minority, who are disabled. And we're here today because of the children in this video. No child in America should be talking about if I live to adulthood. We've got to give our children hope, and we're here to stop the backward slide. I'm going to do a very brief presentation, turn it over to Jeff Canada, then to Geoff Garin, and we will then have questions. But I hope that before you ask your questions, you will pick up the microphone so that we can keep it all on record. And I thank you all for being here. We think that the black child is sliding backwards, and that the black child and the black family faces one of the worst crises since slavery, and that we've got to come together as adults of every race, but especially in the black community, to do something about it and to create the movement, to give all of our children hope and a decent education. Over 80% of our children in 4th, 8th, and 12th grade cannot read or compute at grade level. If you cannot read or compute in this globalizing economy, you are being sentenced to social and economic death, and education is a prime concern of our community. 40% of our children are being born into poverty, and over 70% are being born out of wedlock in single-parent families. The fraying family is one thing that we've got to address and to reweave and to reestablish a sense of community caring for our children. 1 in 3 of our children is at risk of going to prison in their lifetime if you're a black boy born in 2001, and we are committed in this Black Community Crusade for Children to dismantling the cradle-to-prison pipeline and replacing it with a pipeline to college and to productive work and successful adulthood. We're seeing the resegregation of schools, and we are seeing the greatest gulf between rich and poor in recorded history, and we've seen a dramatic growth in child poverty. 40% of our black children being born into poverty. Again, we've got to speak up and make sure that employment opportunities and a reason to stay in school and to think that there's going to be a better future if you strive in the right way must be reestablished. You will see Dr. Andrew Sum's report in our packet. I'm talking about the absolute non-existence job prospects if you are a school dropout. and the backward slide of young families and young black males in our economy. We have got to address unemployment, we've got to address jobs, we've got to address the ability of people to support families and to live law-abiding lives with hope. We've got to do better. We have made great progress over the last 50 years, but we are at risk of losing that progress as we let our children slide backwards. In 1990, the Children's Defense Fund, while we were addressing the problem of all children, were deeply concerned about what we saw happening to black children. And so we convened 22 black leaders with Dr. John Hope Franklin and Dr. Dorothy Irene Haidt in Bellagio, Italy at the Rockefeller Conference to look at the problems facing black children, and we concluded that they faced a crisis and that all of us had to do everything we could to address that. And so we decided to launch a black community crusade for children. We had a big debate about whether this was a black community crusade for all children or whether it was a black community crusade for just black children. And we concluded that it was a black community crusade for all children because more white than black or Latino children are poor. We help black children who may well be the weakest and most vulnerable link in parts of our society. We're helping all children. The fact is that our treatment and neglect of children is unacceptable and is going to be the moral and economic Achilles heel that will bring this country down unless we address it. And so we decided to launch a Black Community Crusade to leave no child behind. That's where that phrase came from. And we still meant it. We meant it then. We mean it now, even though it got hijacked, and we're committed to renewing that effort. We have made some very significant progress. We'll talk about it very briefly after we hear Geoff Garin's presentation. 4 years later, after we began the crusade, we asked Hart Associates to conduct a poll of black adults and black children and young people to make sure that we were right, we were getting it right, and that we were really listening and hearing and seeing what their chief concerns were. That was conducted in 1994, and recently we have asked Hart Associates to come and conduct a new poll to see where we have come and where we are now of black children, black adults, and black focus groups of black leaders, and you're about to hear the results of that. This press conference has three purposes. One is to hear about the condition of black children and families and their backward slide. Two, to hear the results of the Hart poll. But third, to say what we're going to do about it. We have things we can do about it. These facts are not acts of God. They're things we can change with the right kind of leadership, and coming together of the black community and providing the kind of voice that will push the nation to do what it should do for all children, but especially those who are most vulnerable. This is not a doom and gloom press conference, even though the facts and the conditions are serious. It is a get off your duff and really make sure that you get back into the fray to make sure that children come first. And adults, too many adults have gone AWOL in our children's lives of all races, and we've got to step up to the plate as adults to put our children first. But in order to do what is right and to develop the right strategies, we need to be very clear about what the realities are. And now I want to present Geoff Garin of Hart Associates to tell us what he's learned in this poll and in these focus groups. Right after Geoff Canada also lays out one of the things that came out of the first Black Community Crusade for Children. We were looking for young, bright, substantive, committed leaders. And we scoured the country to try to find them, and we did find them. And one of those young leaders was Geoffrey Canada, who we have watched in amazement as he has grown, and his voice has grown, and his effectiveness has grown. And one of the most wonderful things that have come out of the Black Community Crusade in this first phase has been the development of a model like the Harlem Children's Zones and its comprehensive continuum of services. And so Geoff, who is now the chair of CDF's board, is going to talk to us, and after which Geoff Garin will present his findings. Geoff Canada.
Thank you, Marian. And in case you didn't get the fact that Marian called for this crusade 20 years ago, she said that I was a young leader. So that just shows you how long that was that anyone thought I was a young leader. Part of the reason that I am here is, Brown versus Board of Education was 1954. So I'm 59, and Marian and I and Angela got together and really said to ourselves, as best we could see, black children face the worst crisis since slavery. Now, you don't make a statement like that casually. And we were checking in with one another to see whether or not we were seeing anything different, because the three of us are all over this country and sometimes all over the world doing things on behalf of children. And we were just trying to figure out if we were exaggerating the plight of what was happening to black children. And I think it was clear to us that we were not. So that as a number of us who started in this business as young crusaders for, I think, the right issues and strategies in this country for children have grown older, we feel the press of history saying to us, if not now, when? And we don't feel like we can wait any longer. Black children are in crisis, and we're going to hear more about that. Marian presented some of the data, but let me tell you what worries me the most. The country has a crisis going on right now in terms of both employment and the restructuring of the employment, I think, economy in this country. The fact that jobs, which people could get who were, fairly modestly educated, folk who maybe had graduated high school, maybe had a 7th, 8th, 9th grade education, as those jobs have disappeared in this country, we've seen a restructuring of our economy. And that restructuring has happened without any of the educators or policymakers really taking into account what this means for America's children. We have heard about jobs disappearing and the fierce competition for jobs, with folks with college degrees competing for jobs that folks who used to have high school degrees used to get, and you've seen this pressure moving down. And as the nation has grappled with an unemployment rate that's close to 10%, we hear in America that we need to get back to where we were 3 years ago. And that is seen as a sign of success. If we could just get the unemployment numbers where they were, won't this be terrific? Well, if that's the way we look at this problem, it means the same group of kids who've been out for the last 20 years will remain out, and everybody will be celebrating, haven't we done a great job? And this kind of structural poverty, the structural inequality, the structural miseducation of our children will continue amidst America celebrating the rebirth of, I think, a flourishing economy. And that has many of us worried. As folk are talking about what is happening around the economic crisis, no one's talking about these communities that we're focused on. And so one of the issues that we said, we believe, this is Angela, Glover Blackwell, and Marian and I, we believe that there was a sense in our community that this was a crisis. And we really wanted to test that sense out. And we had commissioned a poll talking to black adults 20 years ago, I guess. And so we wanted to commission a second poll to just see whether or not what we were hearing and what we were thinking resonated with the larger black community. And Geoff Garin from the Hart Associates has been, I think, critical in bringing this poll together, and he's going to say a little bit about what he found in the poll. And for some of you who don't know, that this is a very special time. This is probably the only time in your life that you will see two Geoffreys who spell their names with a G, right, on the same dais at the same time. So, Geoff, why don't you come and present for us, please?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Age is a state of mind and a state of heart, and so we have two of the best young leaders in America, in Geoff Canada and Marian Edelman.
I'll take that.
So I am honored to be on a platform with them, and delighted to be with you today. I'm here to report on the results of the research that Geoff and Marian described to you. We conducted this in stages that included qualitative research, that is, a series of focus group discussion sessions. In the video you saw earlier, the young people were actually the respondents in our focus groups, and it was quite moving to hear from them, and that's illustrative of the kinds of things we heard. So we here in Washington, D.C., and also in Memphis, Tennessee, we spoke with both parents and children in focus group setting. We had focus groups with two sets of leaders, African-American leaders, that were quite powerful. And then we conducted two quantitative studies with nationally representative samples of African-American adults and African-American children. Let me just briefly introduce my two colleagues, Dr. Rebecca Nasser, who worked with me on this, on the research, and Steve Mitchell, who moderated those focus groups, who you saw on the video. So Marian and Geoff both used the word crisis, and indeed, if you follow the political discourse in America or watch the news on television in America, it's very hard to miss and easy to ignore, but the importance of this research is for people in the black community. This is a crisis that exists in plain sight, and they're quite moving and eloquent in reporting on it. Clearly, there's an overwhelming sense that things remain tough and challenging for black children today. 7 out of 10 African Americans either describe these as tough times or really bad times for black children growing up in America. When we ask whether things are easier or harder today for children growing up compared to previous generations, as Marian described, there is an overwhelming sense that things are more difficult for young people today, not really a sign of very much progress. And indeed, when we ask specifically about what kind of progress has occurred over the course of the past 15 years, we use that time period because of our prior survey was back in 1994, there is there's very little sense of improvement in that period. So if you think about all the time that's passed, only 29% of African Americans say that things have gotten better for a majority of African American children. 2/3 say that if things have gotten better, it's only touched just some or very few African American children. And you can see that that's a pervasive view that exists across demographic groups. And so it doesn't matter whether we're talking about well-educated or African Americans or those with less educational attainment, more affluent or less affluent. This is a persistent view that things have not gotten better for the majority of African American children. In fact, when you try to break this down a little bit and ask about the change that's occurred by the economic status of the child, even when we're asked people to focus on what's occurred for African American children in middle-class families, there's no real sense of improvement. As many people say that things have gotten worse for them as say that things have gotten better. And then when we ask people to focus on the situation of African American children in poor and low-income households, there's a clear sense that a situation has deteriorated over the course of the past 15 years, where half of all respondents say that for low-income children, things have gotten worse rather than better. Only less than a quarter say that things have improved for those, so that for a decade and a half, we're going really in the wrong direction. The one positive note I'd want to draw your attention to is that for the young people, at least, they still approach all of this with a feeling of optimism that as they look forward, they think things will be easier rather than harder for them compared to how things were for their parents' generation. That's not a view held by their parents or by African American adults. Looking ahead, they think things will be harder rather than easier. And one somber note here is as the age of as the young respondent increases, they become less optimistic. And indeed, when you dig beneath the surface, when we have these focus group discussions, as you saw on the video, where they start with a feeling of optimism and hopefulness, as they talk about the reality of their lives and the challenges they face, they really draw a very, very different picture, and we'll go into some of that. In terms of what emerges here as the most important problems and challenges facing young African Americans today, there is a overwhelming concern both among adults, and then this was a real focal point in our conversations with the leadership groups about the large number of black boys and men in prison. 75% describe that as a very serious problem. And unemployment, as Jeff Canada mentioned, there's a recognition of the devastating impact that has not just on adults who are unemployed, but on children themselves, and the corrosive impact of unemployment on the community. In fact, when we did the last poll in 1994, those were not great economic times either. But this concern about unemployment has risen substantially and significantly, one of the largest changes from then to now. You can see that there are a host of other problems that are described as being very serious, but a real focus on those two things, unemployment and the large number of boys and men in prison. In fact, on that topic, when we asked adults about their expectations for what will happen to children who are growing up in America today, what experiences do they expect them to have, both positive experiences and negative experiences, and very sadly, the most common expectation is that that this generation will experience racial profiling by police and other law enforcement. Among adults, 4 out of 9 say that that's going to occur to a majority of all young African Americans, and 68% say that it's going to happen to at least half. So when we ask, they'll get a good education, they'll grow up confident, they'll all the positive things that might happen this overwhelms everything else in terms of what people believe will be the common experience of young African Americans growing up in the country today. In that regard, in the discussions, the law enforcement system is a focus of really intense criticism among African American adults. By 53 to 23, they see the law enforcement system and the criminal justice system today as hurting rather than helping African American children. Relatively few see the police as in a benign way. So this is really a very important part of the conversation in the leadership groups. This was the object of a real spotlight. One leader made, I think, a point in a powerful way that said young African Americans just aren't allowed to make the mistakes that white kids are allowed to make, and that the consequences in the law enforcement system are entirely different. For young people themselves, they draw a part, as you heard on the video, they draw a disturbing portrait of drugs and dropouts and violence in their lives, and that's very central to the challenges they talk about when they talk about their lives and what they experience day to day. You can see that among children themselves, 7 out of 10 describe that as either the #1 problem or a very important problem for young people today. And you can see some other things that come up as well. So that in the focus groups, both with the adults and the leaders, there is this, they underline the critical lack of jobs and the impact it has on the economic isolation of families, the inability of parents to provide for their kids and to do the things that kids need in terms of care and attention, and the impact it has on the family itself, the issues of cultural isolation, that is, that the problems of the African American community are no longer central to the American problem or the American project in this regard. The one other thing I'd say about the cultural situation is that throughout all of the groups, and regardless of who we're speaking with, the hip-hop culture comes in for an enormous amount of criticism as well. And then there's an enormous conversation about the fracturing of black communities and families in a variety of ways that you see listed here, and the splintering of the larger black community, a lack of unity from top to bottom. In terms of moving forward, there is a clear conclusion here among the folks with whom we spoke, is that the solution to these problems really do start at home. It's that there's a focus on parents and adults in general of having let African American children down, and that parents at the end of the day have the most important role to play, not the only role, but the most important role in terms of moving this in the right direction. And the children themselves talk about the powerful influence of a loving and caring adult in their lives. In terms of what it is that adults can do, is that it's really this being involved, and children say the same things, that there needs to be the involvement of a caring adult. But I want to make it clear that is the beginning of the story, not the end of the story. While the community and parents obviously have a very important role to play that's recognized, there is also a recognition of a need for real institutional and structural change, whether we're talking about how the economic changes, the law enforcement, the education system. There are lots of ways in which parents alone can't do this. Community alone can't do this. There needs to be fundamental institutional changes to address the crisis that's sort of described here. Obviously, the community has a role. And finally, the leaders in particular talked about the need now, the urgent need now, to rebuild a movement or create a new movement to address these problems. That there is, I think, this is an inflection point in terms of whether the political will, both nationally and within the community, exists to really attack and address these challenges, and that it really is a do-or-die moment, listening to the leaders in terms of building that political will and building the political structure to try to move things forward. So thank you very much, and let me turn it back.
Thank you, Geoff. So Marian mentioned that this was not a doom and gloom press conference, although hearing the data, you'd say, well, where's some of the good stuff that comes out of, I think, this conference? And, 20 years ago, when Marian called us together to really look at this crisis and create the Black Community Crusade for Children, a number of us started grappling with the complexity that these problems present. And so you hear the challenges, and the challenges are in every single area. You're talking parenting, you're talking education, you're talking community, and you're looking at the really the breakdown of a community whose job it is to help children successfully transfer from that childhood to adulthood where they can become important and useful members in their community. This happens intensely in certain areas. And so it's not Philadelphia, it's certain parts of Philadelphia. It's not Chicago, certain parts of Chicago. It's not New York, it's certain parts of New York. And you can go through the South and through the West and across this country. And those problems tend to be concentrated in poor communities, number one. And really you get these other sort of mega effects: incarceration disproportionately, arrest disproportionate in communities of color. And so when we began to try and figure out what we could do to counteract these forces, we came up with one strategy that we used at the Harlem Children's Zone, which was really a community-based approach. Marian talked about reweaving the fabric of community. And we're talking fabric, we're talking all of the things that are supposedly helpful to children that have been torn apart. And so if you look at what we did as a result of the Crusade, we created a fairly comprehensive strategy that went to the adults with the message that we have to take responsibility in rebuilding our community. So we went building by building and block by block, saying to folks, we have to be the leaders to let our kids know that there's a future. And one of the reasons it's so important to rebuild these communities, if children are growing up in a place that most of us wouldn't be caught dead, they know that success means getting out of that place, right? They don't think success is getting an education and coming back and helping, so you are constantly draining all of the talent out of certain places because all the kids who can get out, they get out. That's how it was when I was growing up in the South Bronx. We just said, boy, if I make it out of here, I'm gonna go as far away from this place as I can. And we've got to change those kind of communities so that they become magnets for talent, and they're not places that really push the talent that does come out of those communities in other places. The second thing is, look, the challenge starts literally from the moment of conception in some communities. I mean, it's all of the prenatal care, it's all of the low birth weights, it's the access to appropriate and quality health care. And then by the time we can measure children, we see black children are behind, significantly behind their peers. We're talking 3 years old, and you begin to look at verbal abilities and the number of words children have. It's just astonishing what happens, and it never gets better. It gets worse every year after that. So our belief is we start at infancy, and then we stay with those kids throughout their entire childhood into college, and then we help our kids get through college. And we don't know another way of doing this in those kind of communities I'm talking about. This is not for every community, but the kinds of communities that for 30, 40, 50 years have had most of their children fail, and we think you have to use this comprehensive approach. And education is critical. You heard Marian mention it, it's all done. We've got to have quality schools and quality instructors for our children because it is the only answer to our young people being able to enter into the labor market. And the other issue for us is scale. This is not something, you know, we've got great models, but it's not, you know, helpful to the nation if we're saving, you know, 2,000 kids and we're losing our kids by the hundreds of thousands. We've got to figure out how we take what works and scale it for real. And to that extent, you know, President Obama decided that they were going to replicate our work across the country, and they created a request that went out, and over 330 communities responded. They selected 21 communities. It's called Promise Neighborhoods. And our partner in this, Angela Glover Blackwell at Policy Link, is running the Promise Neighborhoods Institute to help other communities learn so they don't have to recreate the wheel to get this work done. The president put $200 million in the initiative. The Congress has not appropriated the money because we're under continuing resolution. Only $10 million is left there. One of the challenges I think we're going to face is we can't allow another generation to sort of grow up without having some real models on the ground. And while our model is not the only one, we certainly need models that are scalable, that are comprehensive, that really tackle all the needs that young people have. And we think that's one of the opportunities we have, I think, with Promise Neighborhoods. There are a number of us who were involved in the original Crusade, who have continued to do this work. If you don't know the work of Policy Link, I think they are some of the most talented folk in terms of taking policies that we know that work and translating them in a way that communities can use them, and Angela has certainly been in the forefront of this. But there are a number of us who were connected through the Crusade who continue to do this work 20 years later, and we feel like we're making a difference. I think the challenge now, and the reason that we have reconvened the Black Community Crusade for Children, is that, and I think we've done a good job in lots of places, but if you look at the overall impact, it has not risen to scale where we can say it has really made the kind of difference so that we can guarantee our children are going to have a real opportunity to be successful. And so we are calling for the rebirth of the Black Community Crusade for Children, and getting all of the Black community focused on this issue, the religious leaders, our educators, our policymakers, our children, our families. We need from one end to the other of this nation to send out a clarion call saying, look, we've got to stand up for our children. We need government to do its part, but this is not something we can leave the government. We have to take personal responsibility in making sure that this next generation of children really has an opportunity to be successful. And so a number of us are going to continue to work on that, and I'll be happy to take questions, but we're going to bring up our leader in this effort, who's really called us all together and has stuck with this. And with the same intensity, I must warn you, as when I first started with her 20 years ago, Marian Wright Edelman. So Marian, maybe you'll come in and just close this part out and we can take questions.
Thank you, Geoff. I want to just say a few of the things that are good and that we know how to move to scale and move into policy. And one of the first things we need to move into policy is make sure that the Congress and the administration puts in that money we need to replicate the promise zones and to have a comprehensive continuous services. But that won't happen unless we raise our voices as a community and insist that we get this done. Secondly, I want to say there are a number of other models that got created out of the Crusade that we need to move to scale and into policy. One of the first things that we tried to do was to try to make sure that we were going to train a new generation of children and young people to be servant leaders and to carry on this movement. And we picked up the model of the Summer Freedom Schools out of the Summer Project of Mississippi in 1964. And over the last 20 years, or over the last 16 years, we have had freedom schools developed that have served over 80,000 Black young people, some Latino children and white children, who have had a freedom school experience, these are summer literacy programs to give children safe havens and to get them excited about learning and reading, to learn how to resolve conflict nonviolently. We engage parents, and parent engagement is very strong in these freedom schools. And they learn how to be empowered and to be strong inside. And we are so proud of the Freedom School models. There were 142 of them last summer. And one of our goals in this second phase of the Black Community Crusade for Children is to at least double, but we need to triple and quadruple the Freedom School concept and make sure that every child, every summer, after school, and on Saturdays have a safe place to go with positive role models so that they know what they can do, where they're reading terrific books, where they're there in the care of caring adults. But these 80,000 young people now are on a leadership trajectory, and we're very proud of what they've done. We'd like for every Black church, and I'm very pleased that in the second phase, the Congress of National Black Churches, all Black, 9 major Black denominations have endorsed this crusade, and we hope we're going to have freedom schools in every Black church. We hope we'll start with Saturday school in many of them, but children need safe havens, they need stimulating programs, and we're very pleased that the evaluations that have occurred in some freedom school cities like Kansas City, and they're going to be released positive results in Charlotte-Mecklenburg next week, and in rural South Carolina, is that freedom schools are staunching summer learning loss. They're making significant reading gains if we stay with them because we have a quality integrated reading curriculum. And children, more importantly, are getting a sense of empowerment, of self-esteem. They learn that they're not citizens in waiting. And while I am really eager to improve test scores, I'm more eager to improve and build strong children inside so that they can withstand the corrosive messages of the media and of our violent culture and of our entertainment and violent culture. So Freedom Schools is a model we want to take to scale now. We have the tools to do it, we have the training, and I want to just say how proud I am of the 9,000 college students over the last years that have come to teach these children in Freedom Schools. Over 1,200 came to Haley Farm last year for training, and young people now in college are stepping up to the plate. And are becoming role models. Many of them are going to go into teaching, and we're just very proud of them. They do want to serve. They do want to be good advocates. They just need to be brought together in a community and given opportunities to serve and to advocate. So one of the goals, double at least, and do more on Freedom Schools, after school in the summer and on Saturdays. And there's no reason why every black sorority and fraternity can't be sponsoring Freedom Schools, but big model that we can move to scale and into policy. And the issue is quality programming. Second, we have been really focused on training new generations of leaders, and over 20,000 young leaders have come to Haley Farm over the last years and received training and are engaged in helping children in a variety of manners. And we have made a new commitment over the next 5 years to training at least 5,000 new young leaders, at least half black males, because we just need to begin to get more black males and Latino males in the classrooms. And many of our Freedom School teacher mentors have become teachers and principals and educators, and we're very proud of them. We want to get back in and reclaim our children's values and give them a sense of what they can become. And so training a new generation of leaders is absolutely crucial. We have a number of models on the ground in the Southern Regional Office on empowering black women through human rights commissions and in trying to make sure that there are economic development opportunities for black women. We're training young black women at the Unita Blackwell Training Institute at Tougaloo College, as well as young black men at Haley Farm, because we need to talk about both sides, raising children effectively and rebuilding the fabric of family. And we have been conducting programs to get children ready for school, the SPARK program, getting children ready for school, aligning the early childhood curriculum with school curriculum, and over 800 children have been successfully served, and the Kellogg Foundation, which funded the first group in 5 Mississippi districts, is now expanding that to 10 over the next years. We have a number of models that are in the packet that you've got. We know what works, we know what we can do. We now just need to move them to scale. We need to provide a policy voice for children. We've made some great strides forward. You know, it was horrible that 40% of our children being born into poverty, but when we started, it was half of children were poor, and we've got to all talk about jobs, employment, and preventing child poverty. We've made strides in expanding the child tax credit and making it more fundable, the earned income tax credit. Again, we know what to do. The investments in the stimulus package were a step forward, but we've got to keep pushing to make sure that we end child poverty in America, for the old poor as well as for the new poor, and that's going to be a core because it is poverty and basic skills level that dictate the failure of so many of our children of all races, but especially of black children. We want to cut off all the reasons why children go into this cradle-to-prison pipeline. Great strides forward. Over the last years, the Crusade and CDF and child advocates have played a major role in trying to make sure that every child gets born healthy and gets health care. And now, after the Child Health Insurance Program and CHIP, which was a major focus of the Crusade in quiet ways, we now have expanded health care coverage for 95% of all children in the new health reform bill. Now we've got to make sure that they actually get it. Access is not the same as actual enrollment in care, so we're going to be engaging in a massive health outreach campaign to make sure that every child gets health care so that they can have their eyes diagnosed and their hearing problems diagnosed and their attention orders diagnosed, and they can hear the teacher and see the teacher and not have to act out. So we've got a major new tool, and the Crusade and CDF and other people made a big difference in that outcome. In that child health bill, there's also money for home visiting so that we can work with parents while they are pregnant and try to begin to help them be better parents. Most parents want to do the best they can, but you can't teach what you don't know. And so we're really trying to see now how we can use these major new tools. We will be pushing exceedingly hard for a strong, high-quality early childhood system. We want to make sure that Title I, when it comes up for reauthorization, will invest in more preschool education. We want to make sure that Title I is going to be fair to the children in the areas of concentrated poverty. And we also want to make sure that Title I targets help on children who are at risk in child welfare and juvenile justice systems so that they can have a chance to reintegrate back into their communities. The cradle-to-prison pipeline, breaking it up, is going to be the overarching framework within which we move forward. But again, what the answer to that is good education, good health care, good role models, good after-school programs and summer programs, and caring adults. Last, I just want to say violence. We've got to stop the violence in this country. We go through these episodes and these crises, and we all see how horrible. We need responsible gun control. How crazy it is that we regulate toy guns and teddy bears, and we don't regulate a product that kills tens of thousands of Americans every year, including 3,042 children over the last years. One of the things that the Crusade found in the first survey was violence and the concern which persists. And so we started an anti-child gun violence, anti-gun violence campaign against children, and every year we issue a report on children and gun violence. We can report progress. When we began, 16 children were dying every day from gun violence. Today, it's 8. It's still a moral obscenity. Black children, black teens are 5 times more likely than white teens to die from gun violence. We've got to stop the killing. We've got to stop the guns. And we really need to speak up. And I do hope that out of this latest tragedy, the country will come together to talk about responsible gun control. And so the violence must stop, but none of us is safe from any of this. And so when we talk about trying to do these things in the black community, we will be doing these things for all of America. Thank you, and we're open for questions now. If you will take the microphone, if any of you have questions. Patty, where is the mic? Are there questions? I want to just also acknowledge the presence today of many other black community leaders in the early childhood development area. This new phase of the Crusade has been endorsed by major black sororities and fraternities, by groups like the Eastern Star, by the National Council of Negro Women, and I've already said by all the black church denominations. We are going to come together as a community to stop the backward slide of our children, to move ahead, and to make sure that the investment of this country and of our community from the civil rights movement of the last 50 years, that we move forward from that. Not on our watch are we going to let our children lose hope. And so that's the challenge, and I know we're up to sort of taking it up. Are there questions of Geoff Garin, of Geoff Kennedy, of any of us? I can't, let's just see. Yes, ma'am. Would you identify yourself, please?
Faye Williams, Chair of the National Congress of Black Women, and of course you can add us to that list.
Thank you.
It was just yesterday that Raheem Jenkins and I were meeting on this very subject, not knowing we were coming here today. But we're ready to do more. Is there some place we can call, somebody
Absolutely.
we can contact? We're ready to start now. I mean, we've done our little bit, in our own ways, but we want to come together, and that's exactly what we are talking about, and many others are out there wanting to find a place where we can coalesce to make a difference.
Yes, ma'am. Go to the Children's Defense Fund website, www.childrensdefense.org. You have a series of things you can do. I was very pleased that 140 black leaders came together at Haley Farm in December to launch this second phase, and they do represent millions of Americans, millions of black Americans. And we do have a very clear agenda, and we have people who can work with you to achieve that agenda. We don't want to reinvent a single wheel. We want to build on best practices, take them to scale. We have the training that you need to get down at Haley Farm. And so do go to the website and do begin to talk about a variety of steps you can take. We need to have house parties and church parties. We need to all be clear about what the problems are, and we ought to be clear that there are solutions to those problems, and each of us needs to take our piece of what that problem can be. And we're going to sit there and make sure that we deal with the issues of family. We're going to reissue our teen pregnancy prevention public education campaigns, but we have the tools. We just now need the political will, so we look forward to working with you.
I'm Madeline Lawson with the Links Incorporated.
Thank you for being here.
First, thank you for staying in the struggle all these years and for all that you do. My question is, you have outlined a number of priorities and goals going forward, and I wondered if within the national organizations, if we were to look at how we could be most effective and most supportive, would you identify a priority that you would say to a national organization, if you could begin here, how we could be most effective in helping?
Well, we feel very strongly about expanding freedom schools and making sure that our children have safe havens and stimulating, educationally relevant experiences so that they don't lose summer learning time. And freedom schools is something everybody can do, or a version of freedom schools, and so that's where I would begin to start. Secondly, I think mentoring and tutoring programs and really, again, investing in youth development. We would love to have the Links and the Jack and Jills and all of our sororities send your best young leaders and let us train them, because we've got to have a critical mass. When we were in the civil rights movement, the adults took time. We were trained, we were engaged, and they need the tools and the motivation, and they're ready. I've been so pleased about the college students and the graduate students who've stepped up to the plate. So I'd love to talk about how we can do a training of a new generation of young people in every organization so that they can carry this movement forward. And third, I just do hope that every black organization will look at our agenda each year for policy, because as much as we do in the black community and as many things as we can do to reach out and reclaim our children, we have got to get this country to place our children first rather than last. We have got to stop our country's priorities being incarceration as a first rather than a last resort. It's obscene that states on average are spending 3 times more per prisoner than for public school pupil. We've got to stop that. We've got to close down these youth prisons in places like New York State that are costing $250,000 a year. How can we sit here and let 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, 11, 12-year-old children be locked up in detention facilities for nonviolent offenses, and we are silent? So we've got a clear policy agenda, and each year the Children's Defense Fund's Action Council announces a scorecard on how well your congresspeople are supporting children. Look at them, because a whole lot of folk kiss babies and then they get behind the budget rooms and they cut babies, and so we need to hold them accountable. So we look forward to meeting with you. We're going to set up regular processes and mechanisms to talk about what each of us can do. We've got all the resources we need in our community to save our children, and we're going to do that. We don't need to reinvent any wheels. There's enough room for everybody, and we've got enough good, positive, best practices to build on to make a difference. So thank you for being here today.
Can I just maybe add one thing to what Marian said for, I think, our national organizations, but really for our entire community? One of the interesting sort of disconnects in the research that Geoff showed was, while the adults really have this sense of impending crisis, our children did not display. They seemed to be thinking things were not quite that bad. And if you think about why, part of the issue is when you look at the influence, the overrepresentation of influence African Americans have in sports and entertainment. I mean, you can hardly turn on anything without seeing an African American, I don't care, golf, tennis, whatever you look at nowadays. And so our kids can grow up believing that there is real opportunity for them out there. Meanwhile, so much of the messaging coming from our entertainment, our own entertainers, is actually leading our kids to destruction, right? It's telling them to do things which is going to destroy any chance they're going to have to participate. So you have a bunch of multimillionaires convincing kids to use drugs and wear their pants down and carry guns, and we have allowed that to happen. All of our national organizations have remained basically quiet while we've let a group of entertainers come up with moral messages that destroy black kids. And I think it's time for the whole community to say enough of that, because at least the kids need to understand that they really are in a crisis and they're going to need to do some things differently. They can't wake up at 17 in jail and then figure out, oh, I shouldn't have listened to that stuff, right? So I just think that we've all got to go out and put pressure on the whole community and say no more of this stuff.
And that, I would just amen to that, and we need to create a culture of achievement in our community, which we had when we were growing up. We need to turn off those TV sets, you know, just stop looking at this junk, just stop it. And open those books and spend time on books and spend time on positive things. I mean, we've got a huge growth over the last decades of black wealth, as Geoff has already alluded. On the other hand, how we're spending it is not reflective of what we need to be doing for our children. I think we're spending about $600 million a year on books and reading materials. We're spending over $3 billion on tobacco and over $30 billion on entertainment. We need to get our heads on. We need to sort of really begin to reclaim the spiritual values and the moral values that led to the civil rights movement and that led to the transformation of America. So let's really begin to speak up against those outside corrosive messages and reclaim our children in our churches, in our families, in our schools, and demand that our schools do what they need to do to educate all of our children to the highest levels. Any other questions here? Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry, here. You've had your hand up for a long while. Go ahead, I'm sorry. It's very hard to see with the light.
Well, I have the microphone. I might as well use it.
Okay.
Ms. Edelman, Mr. Canada, thank you very much. My name is Rob Sivak. I'm a reporter with the Voice of America, which is the congressionally funded broadcasting operation. We're very interested in this story and sharing it with the world. I wondered if you could comment on the particular juncture that you find yourself in, launching this crusade right now with a Republican Congress, or at least a Republican House coming in, you know, severe strictures in the amount of federal money that's likely to be coming out. Are you concerned, or how concerned are you that the federal role in this crusade may have to be smaller, and that in effect the grassroots is going to be much more important than the federal role even in moving this thing forward?
Well, let me start. And certainly the Children's Defense Fund, they have been the experts on any of the federal legislation in regards to children. Look, we can't help but be concerned with the state of the American economy. I think all of us are concerned about not just what's happening nationally, but when you look at what's happening in the states around this country, I mean, it's a real time bomb ticking that I think is going to start blowing up all over the states, all over this country right now. We have, in many ways, I think, squandered a lot of the wealth in America. And you wake up one day and find out not only is the bank empty, but the bank is going to be empty for the next 15, 20 years. And so what I worry about in that construct is that in making limited choices, and the idea that you can't continue to fund at the level we've been funding, in making limited kinds of decisions, are we making the kind of strategic decisions that are going to benefit all Americans? Or are we really looking at benefiting a group of Americans who are what I call the recently poor? And I just want to make sure the nation looks at both sides of the equation. We have a group of Americans who have been struggling to try and get out of poverty for the last 20, 30 years. And the federal resources, I just want to make sure they're spent evenly. Now, on the second issue, one of the reasons we've reconvened the crusade is that we think the black community has to come and be the leaders in saving its own children. That in the end, Marian talked about how we spend our money. In the end, we have to reallocate those resources, because you can't ask for someone else to help your children if you're not helping them yourselves. And so that's part of the message I think we have to bring to the community.
And let me tell you this, we've made progress forward in good times and bad. We can't let the political weather determine what we do for our children and what we demand that others do for our children. That's why we've got to build a strong movement voice that is intergenerational. If every black church leader out there really used those powers of the churches to say to them, and vote the right folk who vote for children, we can change that. We went through a contract for America. We were able to play a role in keeping that balanced budget amendment from doing. But we've got such a strong case to make for children at a time of scarce resources. How in the world can we continue to spend tens of billions of dollars to lock kids up in prison and people up in prison when we could be preventing and saving taxpayer money by investing in health care, by investing in education? We can't afford to have 40% of black children drop out of school. That is going to cost taxpayers millions of dollars. The best investment we can make in a time of economic downturn is in children, in strong families, and preventing problems. So common sense, but more importantly, a strong black voice can counter that. And we need to stop the obscenity of more and more tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires while we're cutting children's programs. We've got to have to say, no, they cannot cut these programs that work for children, and they will not if the black community gets itself together and works with the Latino community and with caring white people to talk about how we've got to get our heads on straight. So it's about movement building. It's about voice at the grassroots level as well as nationally, and we can make this thing work.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh. Good morning. My name is Kelsey Perdue. I'm a third-year student at Howard University, and I'm actually here with about 10 of my peers today. My question is actually for you, Mr. Canada. You mentioned that there's a brain drain going on in struggling communities, and you mentioned how they need to become a magnet for talent. How do we make that happen?
Yeah, I think one of the real challenges that we face is that there are communities that are so violent. There are communities where the schools are so poor that if you're a middle-class person, A, you don't want to risk your family's safety. And B, you can't afford a private school to send your kid, so you're not going to send your kid to a lousy school. And so you choose to live somewhere else, even though you care about that community and you want to see that community do well. And that's just been a reality that we've had to face. And so we think the answer to that is to get a group of adults who live in those communities to start rebuilding those communities. You know, you can be poor without being violent. You can be poor without living in filth and with a sense of abandonment and chaos and in communities that are going to struggle. We don't see an immediate answer to this. We think that we've got to go into those communities and say, look, guys, we've got to work together to make sure our kids growing up believe this is a community that's worth coming back to and being part of the redevelopment of this community. And for us, it's meant going on those street corners, cleaning things up, talking with folks, letting people know that there really is a future for these communities. And you know, when you go into the Camdens and you go into the places in Philadelphia and Baltimore and Detroit where people have just given up and said, you know, this is a terrible place, I want to leave. Those communities could be brought back to life if we come together as a community and make those kind of places, places where kids are successful. So that's where I think the challenge is.
Let me just say as we close this, because I know we've got to move on to other things, is that the civil rights movement began with a very small band of parents who had very little resources, a few lawyers who had very few resources, but who believed that children should have a better life than they did. And young black people, and I used to be 20 and I used to be 15, but there was never a time when I didn't know we were going to get out there and change the world and to do it non-violently. But the key was that we had enough caring adults and role models who gave us opportunities to learn and to serve. But we were gathered together because we had a deep belief in the dream of America, which is now vanishing for so many of our children. And we can do that again. We have so many more resources. Okay, we have enough power in our community to do what we need to do. And I am pleased because I have seen young black people now from Howard and all over, the thousands who have come to Haley Farm, respond to the call, who are learning what children and college students did during that first civil rights movement and who are eager to step up to the plate to undo this cradle-to-prison pipeline, to reclaim our children's values. They're going into the classrooms. They're going out there to organize. And so that's what this crusade is about in this next phase, is getting a critical mass of young and older leaders across all disciplines, all faiths, who are determined that our children are going to move forward, they're going to have hope, and people who have hope and who have a sense that there's a positive future are not going to be violent. They're going to be engaged. They want to form strong families, but if you've never seen anybody work, you don't know that there's something called work and an alternative to prison. So I think this is a moment when a teachable moment for the country where we can come together and lead the country in a new direction, and young people have to be at the forefront of that strong, intergenerational, nonviolent movement that will bring about the kind of America that Dr. King dreamed about. We are going to be on the verge of celebrating Dr. King's birthday. But we ought to reread Dr. King, and rather than just celebrating, we ought to follow him and finish what he began. As he ended his life, he was assassinated, he was calling for a poor people's campaign, a cross-racial poor people's campaign. At that time, there were 11 million poor children. Today, there are 15.5 million poor children. We need to pick up where he started and make sure that we begin to make that dream viable again, and we can do that. And I thank all of you who've come here today for doing that, and we will be working with all of the groups as we move forward and look forward to meeting and being in constant communication with you. Join this crusade to save our children and to save our nation's soul. Thank you.